What's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world? I would like to welcome you back to the Real Talk with Zuby podcast. On today's episode, we have got on an entrepreneur. He is the founder of Wide Footwear, and this is Melker Svard. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Zuby.
No
Pleasure.
doubt, man. Well, I've done a very brief intro there, Melker, but tell people who are not familiar with you a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so in short version, I've always been very active. I was a tennis player, pretty high level. I mean, around like 400 in the world as a junior. Traveled the world playing tennis, and then started playing university tennis in the U.S. That's kind of a route a lot of people go when they end their career, to kind of get to play a couple more years. Always been very interested in health, fitness, business. So tried a bunch of different things, and I think one of the big things that I've felt throughout my life playing tennis is that I've always had a lot of foot pain. And it's fun that like the circle kind of comes to an end here when starting this company a couple of years ago. So yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, let's run it back a little bit. So tell people where you're from, because you're not from the UK, you're not from the USA. Tell people where you're from and a little bit about
Yeah.
your backstory
Yeah.
before getting into that.
Yeah. I actually grew up partly in Brazil. Our family moved there when I was like 5 years old. So I grew up in the American school system in the US, and but I'm from Sweden natively, and I've lived in Sweden like kind of like maybe half of my life, and then in Brazil, and then in the US, and then I've lived a little bit in Spain. So I've been around. Always loved traveling, seeing different cultures, meeting a lot of people, and yeah, just I do love the multicultural. I do think there's a lot we can learn from different cultures. Traveling around food and different the way people treat each other, which I think is quite awesome. So love that.
Absolutely, man. Just before jumping on, you were asking me if I'd ever been to Sweden, and I was saying actually it's been on my list, but it's not a country I've made it to yet. So tell me something I should know about Sweden that I don't. I feel like I have a new admiration for Sweden, by the way, after the way they handled the whole scamdemic situation. I was surprised. I was shocked. I wasn't if someone had asked me in 2019 that told me what was going to happen 2020 to 2022, and they told me guess which European country is going to be the most defiant and who is not going to go along with this stuff. And I'll be totally honest, I would not have guessed Sweden, but now when I hear Sweden, I hear freedom. So I have a newfound respect for your country. So tell me a little bit more
The
about it.
funny thing about that is that nobody's more surprised than I am. I'm equally as surprised as you are. I think we would have been the first one. I was saying earlier, I think, okay, now we're days from locking down the whole country, but it just never happened. And I was, of course, following what was happening in the rest of the world from afar, but I honestly never experienced it. We never had any mandates of any sort. And there was a very, very short, brief period of, these passports to get into like big arenas. But other than that, it was really nothing. And
Mm,
it was kind of surreal because I thought that, okay, this is going to
okay.
get bad. Yeah.
So you didn't expect it either, even as a Swede.
No, not at all.
Okay.
Because Swedish people are very, I'd say in general, don't really like to stand out, kind of likes to be part of the
Mhm.
pack. And it's kind of frowned upon to be, the one to stand out and to be
Mhm.
something.
The
Even though we
anti-look.
have a lot of great entrepreneurs in Sweden, we have that overall mindset in the population.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's how I've always understood. I wonder if it was just a matter of leadership. I guess perhaps you
I don't
had
know.
more bold and courageous leaders than other countries did. Because something interesting, and I don't know if everyone knows this, is the UK was actually going to take the same approach. That was initially the plan for the UK, just to keep calm and carry on. And then, I think our prime minister at the time, Boris Johnson, actually he caught the thing and got hospitalized with it. And I think
Right.
I think that scared him because he came out of hospital and then suddenly they started shutting everything down and doing all the mandates and everything. Like they reversed what they were originally going to do, which was similar to what Sweden did, which is just give people information and carry on as usual. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was a very interesting time.
Yeah, and I will say to Sweden's defense that we are quite rational as people, I think, and I think that's maybe something that played a part. That it was like, okay, let's not get emotionally carried away
Mm,
here. Let's actually look at the data, look at the facts. And
yeah.
in hindsight, maybe that's something that played a part. But
Well, I think Germans are also known for being rational, and they also
True,
went crazy.
true.
so, so I don't know, but yeah, I thought maybe you'd have some insight there. But moving on to what you've been working on recently, you've started a footwear company.
Mm.
So tell me a little bit more about Wide Footwear, because this isn't just any footwear company. It sounds like you are on a crusade to change the way people think about their feet, change the way people think about their shoes. So tell me how you got started with that.
Yeah, well, as I said before, I've always had a lot of foot pain. I've quite wide feet myself, no pun intended with the brand name, but and like growing up playing a lot of tennis, I always thought it was normal to have foot pain. I always thought it was normal to break in a shoe for 2-3 weeks and then you can wear it and it kind of hurts, but it's nothing big. But then 3 or 4 years ago, I got really interested in this term called barefoot shoes, and I was got curious because I thought maybe this was the answer to what I've been looking for because I didn't know what I had been missing out on, and I went kind of crazy with it. I ordered a bunch of different brands, tried them, and I thought, hey, this is amazing. But then after a while, I didn't really like them anymore. It kind of hurt me to walk for long periods of times in them and going, from one extreme to the other extreme. Um, so then I booked a consultation with one of the leading foot experts in the world. This was in 2021, sorry. And at the end of the session, which was awesome, this company called My Foot Function, he did like a 3D scan of my foot. I walked on this thing called a plantar pressure plate to learn how my step, how the pressure is divided. And he did like a manual analysis of my foot. And then at the end of the session, I asked him, so what shoes would you recommend me? And he was very hesitant to answer that question. And that got me thinking right after, like, if this leading foot expert in the world cannot recommend me a shoe that he thinks is perfect, then it probably doesn't exist. So over the coming days, I went back home. My mind was spinning with it. And I talked to my brother, who is like one of the most renowned physiotherapists here in Sweden, works with a bunch of athletes, and yeah. And we just put our heads together and we said, what if we could actually create a shoe that we think is perfect? And then at least, no matter if the company fails, at least we'll have shoes for life. That's literally what we said in the beginning. And he was like, sure. I mean, it sounds great, but I don't know how to make a shoe. Do we buy like a sewing machine, or how do we even do it? And I had been involved in startups before, so I kind of knew the process. And I just said, as long as we put our heads together, we figure out exactly how it's going to work, then I'll make sure that it goes from an idea to an actual product. And yeah, that process took 2 years. It was during COVID as well, so couldn't travel to the countries where we produced them. And then yeah, 2 years later, we're super happy with the results, and so are customers. So it's been a fun journey so far.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about something that I have not talked about at all on this podcast over the past 4.5 years. And this is feet and shoes. So I, like most people, don't spend that much time thinking about my feet, my foot health, and my shoes. I probably spend more time than the average person, in fact, because
Yeah.
I train a lot. And so
Mhm.
I have different shoes for different things, right? I have like specialist squat shoes, which most people don't have. I have different types of trainers for different sorts of things. But what is the problem with most shoes? If I go on your social media, I see lots of tirades about modern shoes and how
Yeah.
they're destroying people's feet and all the problems that they're causing. I don't think this is something that's even on most people's radar, right? They just throw shoes on because they look cool and they're walking around, thousands and thousands of miles in them, maybe millions over the course of their life. So, what is fundamentally the problem with modern shoes that needs fixing to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, I do think I agree with you. I think 99% of people, maybe higher, don't ever think about this problem. And I think a lot of people think that the foot is kind of separate from the body, right? We think of our upper body and then we think about our legs, and then it's like, oh, down there are the feet. Like, who really cares? The thing about the feet is that they are the foundation of the whole body, right? They are what connects us to Mother Earth, and it's a very complex structure of bones and ligaments and yeah, a bunch of things like muscles, right? So they are literally what allows us to stand on 2 feet. So it's quite an amazing structure of being that we've created throughout evolution. And since we started walking on two legs, this is probably 2 million years ago, somewhere around there. And the foot has a lot of characteristics that kind of needs to be respected. And everybody's born with perfect feet, unless you have some like genetic thing, But the thing with shoes, there are really four major components to why they're not optimal. So the first one is shape of the toe box. So if you look at a newborn's foot, or if you look at a foot from a native tribe that has never worn shoes in their whole life, you'll see that the widest part of the foot are the toes, which means that there's a V shape like that. And if we look at modern shoes, they're shaped the opposite way, which means that they are pointy at the toes. They're the narrowest where the toes are, which puts the toes in an unnatural position, and especially the big toe, because the big toe is so important to. It's called the big toe for a reason. It's supposed to take more load than the lesser toes because it has more skeletal mass and everything. So when we put the big toe in an unnatural position, the other toes needs to take more load, but we're also putting the big toe to sleep, which affects our whole posture, our whole biomechanics, our whole balance, our strength, our performance, and everything. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the sole and how stiff it is. So the big toe is supposed to be able to bend quite a lot. Like it's supposed to at least bend like 45 degrees. Some people do a little bit longer. But if you have a super stiff sole where that can't bend, especially then at the big toe, then you're kind of, again, putting that part of the foot to sleep. You're literally deactivating the foot. And then the third thing is something that we call in the industry is a drop, which means that the heel is often higher than the front of the foot. It's probably something that is, of course, very obvious in something like a high heel, but most shoes have this actually. It's higher at the heel and lower at the front. And this is actually quite literally like standing downhill. And what happens if you stand downhill, you put a lot more pressure at the front of the foot, which means that they can never relax, never work as intended. And the fourth thing is something called a toe spring. And that's where, after you had this drop that I just talked about, where you're standing downhill, at the end of where the toes are, it's kind of like an uphill slope again, which means that the toes are then stretched upwards. And that means that the plantar fascia under the foot is then stretched and put in an unnatural position. So to summarize, you're cramping your toes together. You're using a stiff sole so that your toes cannot bend as they're supposed to. And then you're standing downhill and then also angling your toes upwards. So it's really these four components that are so messed up with shoes today that has become so normalized, like you said, because of fashion and because of a lot of different things that we can go into. But it's those are the four main things.
Our podcast today is sponsored by The Wellness Company. As you guys know, I'm always looking for the best health and wellness products to give me an edge. But if I eliminate businesses that have gone woke or forced vax mandates on their employees, there are fewer and fewer companies that I feel comfortable supporting. That's where The Wellness Company comes in. The Wellness Company was formed by a team of doctors who lost their jobs for speaking up about mandates and pushing back against lockdowns. They offer live telemedicine and a wide range of custom formulated supplements to help keep you at your best. My favorite Wellness Company product is their Spike Support formula. It's the only product I've seen that contains ingredients researched to block and dissolve COVID spike proteins in the bloodstream. Taking daily Spike Support can bring better mental clarity and increased energy levels. Whether you're vaxxed or unvaxxed, it doesn't discriminate, and neither does the Wellness Company. Get back to that pre-COVID feeling. Go to twc.health/Zuby and use code Zuby, that's ZUBY, to save 15% at checkout. That's twc.health/Zuby and use the code Zuby at checkout. Okay, I understand that. Given that's how most shoes are designed, what's the reason for that? Is it simply a matter of aesthetics? Is it just that they decided, okay, this is what looks cool, this is what looks fashionable, so this is what we're going to go with? Because the reason I primarily ask is because a lot of shoes, even casual shoes that people wear, what people might call trainers or sneakers, they come from the world of sports. They come from the world of athletics primarily, whether you're talking about tennis shoes or basketball shoes, cross train. I mean, they're literally named after the sports which they're primarily designed for. And as we know, when it comes to sports, especially at a professional level, things are they do everything that they can to try to eke out, an additional 0.1% of performance. So given that, and given that they have all types of specialists there, how and why is it that these so-called athletic shoes all have typically the design of what you've just described? The thick,
Yeah.
inflexible sole,
Mhm.
the drop, the very narrow toe box, and so on. Why are they designed in such a way? Maybe some of the history of that. I'm trying to understand.
Yeah.
I know sometimes just because something exists in a certain way and it's normalized doesn't inherently mean that it's good. But I'm curious, coming from that sports world where they're spending all this time trying to perfect nutrition and trying to perfect training and perfect all this, why would you then have people running around in shoes that are suboptimal, or which are even causing damage?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that we need to remember is that a lot of sports are quite unnatural in our evolution. So we're doing unnatural things that sometimes require like an unnatural solution. Like for example, if we want to run super fast on a specific surface, maybe we do need spikes under the sole to be able to have that friction. Or if we're playing soccer, then maybe we need a specific curve of the toe box to be able to curl the ball when we're shooting it, right? And there are specific characteristics of those things that I just mentioned that can be beneficial in some sports. But when we're talking about movement in general, walking, running in general, then there's no benefits to any of those. And I think that's where I'd like to focus on, because I do recognize that. I mean, I've played tennis myself. I could have never played tennis barefoot, for example. That wouldn't have worked because of the way you move on the court. It's a very weird surface. The quick turns and everything. It would hurt quite a lot. Uh, but if we the first part of your question there, like why are shoes even shaped the way they are? Of course, there's a long history all the way from back that we walk, as I said, started walking on two feet, and we probably hurt our feet on some sharp objects. So we use like animal skin to protect under our feet just to get some protection. But this, of course, evolved a lot over time. And I think the most, as I see it, the most impactful event of this was the Industrial Revolution. Because what happened then was that we needed to, people wanted to mass produce shoes quickly. And they said pretty much, what if we make one mold that can fit both shoes? So, I mean, both feet, sorry. So basically making a symmetrical shape that could fit
Mhm.
both feet. And that and you, because before that you probably went to your local shoemaker and you said, okay, I want a left shoe and I want a right shoe, and he made the left and a right. But then starting to mass produce, making that symmetrical shape. But the problem is the feet are not symmetrical, but they've kind of turned symmetrical now that we're wearing those over a lot of years. And then of course that is carried on into fashion of all these years, where today, the big companies don't use the same sole for both feet, but it's kind of that the shape is so rooted into our culture, into our fashion, into everything, that it's very hard to go away from that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what are some of the problems typically caused by modern shoes? You've discussed those briefly, but go into more detail about the potential harm or real harm that is being caused by the shoes that most people are wearing every day.
Yeah, I mean, up to the latest statistics I saw is that up to 75% of people will actually experience some kind of foot pain during their life. And we believe in our team, I'm not the physio, but the rest of the physios and the feet experts and the sports scientists, they believe that almost all of that is preventable. And almost all of that is due to the fact that we put our feet into shoes from a very young age and we stop moving as the body intended. And this of course has a lot of consequences. Like people have flat feet, which is connected to the arch. And then, but one of the things that I find that maybe most heartbreaking is that if we look at the older generation, one of the number one causes of death is losing balance and falling, right? And it's a huge problem. And if we look at balance, this is a test anyone can perform at home. If you take your shoes off, your socks off, and everything, and you kind of pinch your toes together, just like they probably already are for most of people, and then you try to stand on one leg with your eyes closed. Most people in the Western world have a very hard time to do that for 1 minute. But if you spread your toes out, you align your big toe, all of a sudden people get so much better balance in a millisecond because the foot starts working right as it was intended. You're supposed to be able to take some of that twisting onto your, or load onto your big toe. So that's what we see in like uncontacted tribes. When you look at the photos of their feet, they are so wide, they are so
Mhm.
aligned. And when people have visited them, even the 80-year-olds can stand on one leg for minutes with their eyes closed. So there's some kind of disconnect there, and there's something that happens there that they also have, to go into deeper of your question there. If we look at how the foot affects performance, mobility, strength, all of these things, it's quite remarkable how forgotten it is actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's as you said at the beginning, I mean, it's the base. It's our connection point between us and the ground. So
Yeah.
whether you're just standing still or you're balancing or you're walking or you're doing any type of athletics, it's the foundation of it all. So it makes sense very logically, even if someone doesn't know the physiology of it, that if there's a problem at the base, if there's a problem at the foundation, then that's going to have an impact throughout the entire kinetic chain.
Yeah, I mean,
So
you
when
can't
okay.
expect the body to work if the foundation is messed up, right? I mean, that just makes logical sense. If you would destroy a tree at the root, you would never expect the rest of the tree to be functioning or healthy. So just from a logical perspective, it makes sense.
Yeah,
Sorry to cut you off.
absolutely. Yeah, no, all good. So when you started your company, Wide Footwear, tell me about the process of going about trying to create this perfect shoe. What was that process like? What were the iterations? And what were, obviously you've talked about the four primary things that most shoes get wrong. So talk me through how you went about tackling that problem.
Yeah, that was a lot of headaches over 2 years to get that right. It's especially, I would say, because we could never visit the factory that we were working with. I think the hardest part was not saying what we wanted. The hardest part was to get our manufacturing partners to understand why we wanted it. Um, and also with machinery, we could not use a lot of the existing machinery. We had to make new ones because everything is tailored to this normal shape of a shoe. Um, Even down to like connecting the sole to the upper material. That machine has a specific shape where it takes, and ours just didn't work there. So we needed to buy this extremely expensive adapter, pretty much, to fit it there. But I think tackling all of these issues, one big thing that we were thinking about, that we thought was a problem, and why we even started the brand in the first place, was that didn't want people to go from one extreme to the other. Because we have to remember that a lot of people have been walking in these shoes for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. So it's very hard to, if I felt that it was hard to go from the traditional shoes to like the super minimalist barefoot shoes, then probably more people are going to feel that, and people that are in a lot worse shape than I am. And we wanted to have a solution for everybody. So what we did was that we said the most important thing of the shoe is the toe box, where the toes can actually spread as intended. And I think everything that we do is guided from that. Then there will be, like we talked about before, some shoes that we make will have other characteristics, that maybe a thicker sole to help some people, or maybe that's better for walking on an unnatural surface downtown, or other things like that. But the one thing that we will never budge on is the shape of the toe box. But going back to the process of manufacturing, I think, like I said before, one of the four is the toe spring, for example, where it curves up in the beginning and at the end of the toes. I remember this very clearly. Was speaking to our manufacturing partner. I said, so at the front we don't want a toe spring, and he was like, but I can make you a toe spring. You don't have to worry about that. And I said, but yeah, I know you can make it, but I don't want it. And he almost couldn't understand like why I wouldn't want it. So there's been a lot of funny moments like that in the process. But and then like one of the most important things is our sole. It's just a little bit thicker than normal barefoot shoe. We don't call ourselves a barefoot shoe. We call ourselves a functional footwear, but it's a whole science in itself. And I'm happy I was a little bit naive going into this, because it's not just to just say, let's just make a sole. This is the stack height, whatever. But it's a whole science in like the density and the blending of materials to make it bend like you want. And that's what I would say took the majority of the time to create and to perfect, for it to become exactly like we wanted. A lot of
Yeah.
headaches.
Yeah, no, I can understand. I'm curious to know because, as a fellow entrepreneur,
Yeah.
people with everything, doesn't matter if it's a physical product or something digital or even service-based, people see the end result, but the process is usually hidden. So someone can go on a website and they can, oh, look at this shoe, look at this phone, look at this book, look at this music, whatever it is, and they're oblivious of the process, right? They just see a shoe and it's like, cool, it's a shoe. So I'm curious to know, going to a foot specialist and asking for a recommendation for an ideal shoe, and he doesn't know, and that sparks something in your brain as an athletic guy. And you go to your brother and you're thinking, okay, how can we do this? And then you've got to go through the iterations, work with people in foreign factories. How many different examples, what's the right word?
Samples, yeah.
Samples, yes. How many samples, how many iterations did you go through before you had something where you were like, okay, this is something we can be proud of and we can go to market with?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think north of somewhere around 12 to 15, I would say, until
Yeah.
we were really happy with it. And the thing that should be said there is, every time we got a new one, I was sure that this was going to be the one. That now we got it. But it's a good lesson, I think. And I mean, as I said, it took 2 years to manufacture and to get to the point where we're ready to launch. And 2 years is quite a long time for a lot of people. I think a lot of people give up after like 3-6 months if they don't see a
2
result.
days.
2 days, maybe.
2
And
weeks. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, and I think for us, I think it was good that we had each other throughout that, because I think alone it would have been a lot harder. So to have a partner is key, I think. But yeah, just been enjoying the journey. And as we said in the beginning, look, we love the shoe, and if it doesn't sell, at least we'll have thousands of pairs for the rest of our lives. It's unlimited Christmas gifts for friends and family. So luckily that didn't happen, and it's been quite a success so far. But yeah.
Who was your first customer?
First customer was this very nice lady called Maria here in Sweden, and I'll never forget that when the phone plinged the first time. It was very, very, very nice moment.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
So what's the plan for it now? When did Wide Footwear launch? When did you officially open up?
We launched in the middle of May of this year.
Okay.
It's
So
very new.
just a couple months. Okay, cool. So we're not even at the 6-month mark yet.
Nope.
Okay. And are you selling them worldwide at the moment through the website, or is it just certain regions?
We started selling worldwide, but then we got crushed on shipping to the US, especially because we had quite a lot of interest from the US. So then we did only Europe for a while, and it's been doing that well. But now we actually, last week, we found a way to start shipping worldwide again. So starting next week sometime, we will be going worldwide again. So I know there's a lot of Americans that are kind of sending us messages all the time asking. So that's it's gonna be fun to finally get back there. Something close to my heart, of course, because I lived there for 5 years, and I'd like to give it, especially because the funny thing about the US is you realize, because in Sweden, I mean, you've lived in several different places, I know as well, but in Sweden, it's normal to take off your shoes when you come home, right? But in the US, people wear shoes all the time. I thought it was so weird when I first moved to the US, and I was like, I went home to people, and it's like, why are people wearing shoes, like sitting here on the couch? This is completely weird to me. So I think the US is probably one of the countries that needs our product the most, to be honest.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's the biggest market for sure for a product like that. And also, it's one of the it is, I mean, at least in the Western Anglosphere, it's probably the least healthy country. I'm sure it's got the most athletes, but it's also the least healthy country. So you've got an interesting dichotomy there where you've got millions of people who are massively into sports and training and going to the gym and even top level athletes. But then you've also got a general population that, to be frank, is very overweight and very out of shape. I'm in the USA right now. I see it constantly. Um, people are not in good shape here in general, especially compared to somewhere like Sweden. UK is not great either, but UK is a little bit better. Um, so yeah, man, I mean, I think with the right branding and marketing and messaging and just awareness, like I think you can crush it. I think it's a very intriguing. I haven't tried out the shoes myself yet, but
We're
as
gonna have
someone
to be a new
who
pair.
yeah, as someone who thinks about these things and who's in the gym, 5 times a week, whatever country I'm in, um, yeah, it's something that I think about a lot myself, because even I've been like, I have searched on Google before, what are the best training shoes? What are the best type of shoes for squats? What are the best shoes to deadlift in? What are the best, just general all around lifting shoes? Because I travel all the time. I can't be packing, 18 different pairs of shoes in my bag. I just want one pair of shoes for the gym that I can take on the road with me. So with myself, as someone who is always traveling, always on the road, going to the gym, lots of different places. I can't be, and typically I travel with one big suitcase and a smaller one. So I don't have the space nor the weight to pack, a dozen different types of shoe. So I've many times over the years, I've been training for, good grief, 20 years at this point. And, I want to know, okay, what is the best all around shoe that I can have for my type of training? Do I pack my Converse Chuck Taylors? Do I pack Nike Air Maxes? Do I pack some type of barefoot shoe? What should I do? So it's a massive question, and I think that more and more people, whether they're just everyday athletes or they're professional athletes, are asking those type of questions. So I think you've jumped on a very big opportunity here.
Yeah, and I think it's already a big market. I mean, we have some players in our industry that do $100 million plus. So there's a lot of interest, and I do think when I'm looking at trends, it's definitely growing over the past couple of years. And I think it's something that will continue to grow, because as soon as people try it and give it like 30 days, it's very hard to go back. It's very hard to put your feet back into the tight, narrow shoes. I mean, I personally I find it a little bit heartbreaking, because I've spent a lot of money on shoes, and I have a lot of them that are collecting dust right now because I can't wear anything other than my own brand at this point. And I think, but that's a good lesson also, because one thing that I've learned throughout this is that there are a lot of brands that try to do better functional shoes, but they mostly look quite awful. And they're not, if we're going to put it nicely, they're not shoes that a 16-year-old can look at and think, that's the coolest shoe that I've ever seen. It's mostly like very minimal, very athletic, maybe very,
I
just not
think
appealing.
Yeah, I think when you focus absolutely on function
Yep.
rather than appearance or fashion, then that becomes visible. And someone who's trying to design the perfect shoe might not like the idea that looks matter, or you've got some people who think, oh, looks don't matter. Everything's about comfort and function. And the truth is, look, if you are someone who cares about style at all, or if you're a young person and you want to look cool and you want to have some cool shoes that your friends can say, "Hey, cool shoes, man." They have to look cool. They have to look cool. Like they can't look goofy. If my feet look goofy, but I'm there telling everyone, yeah, but like these are all the features. People don't really care, right? It's like,
Yeah.
first things first. It's what you
Yeah.
see. It's how human beings are, right? We're visual creatures.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you can, it looks like you found that amalgamation between something that looks cool and also has all the properties that you've said. Because when I look at the shoes on your site, I can tell that there's something different about them, especially like with the wider toe box, but they don't look. I've seen all sorts of shoes, but they don't look goofy. They don't look like, okay, these are some, I don't know, Ninja Turtle type shoes or some like very weird. like I look at them, okay, cool. I could wear these without feeling like I've got some weird, goofy thing on my feet. So
Yeah, but yeah, and I think that's something that I think about a lot too, because I think, sure, the ones we have now, our first model is very minimalist, very clean. We didn't want it to stand out that much because I know the shape does stand out quite a lot. But I think something that will become a lot more visible in our coming releases, hopefully later this year, early next year, is that we're trying to compete with the coolest shoes on the market. You know, the cool Nike Air Forces, the Adidas Yeezys, and these things. Because I do think, like, to make a real change, we have to capture the youth. We can't just get people when they're 35, 40 years old, when they realize, oh, my feet hurt. We have to kind of realize that there's a root cause of this, and young people are destroying their feet from a young age. So I think that's where I dream of, like, my future kids to grow up in a world where they can wear maybe our brands to school, and then they can be like, okay, oh, you have the new one, the new wide shoe, that's super cool, like I want that too. And it's not like, oh, what is that? You know, that's kind of my vision for it. And I think that will be actually quite a pleasant surprise with our next release, which is a sneaker. So I'm very excited for it. And I've shown it to a lot of people in that category of people. And some, I've been pretty surprised with the feedback. People that I would never see wearing our brand 3 months ago have said, I need those when they are out. And
okay,
to me, that's a big compliment. And that's what makes it really exciting to release it whenever that is, depending on
that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Dude, I think what you're doing is awesome. I look forward to checking out the shoes myself. And man, props to you for making it happen as well. Like, I know I know you're just a few months in at the moment, but I can see the vision. I can tell just from talking to you that you've thought this through very well, right? You're a diligent guy, you're a conscientious person, you've actually got a vision for this. So I can tell when I'm talking to someone who isn't just like, I don't know. There's a lot of wannabe entrepreneurs out there, right? Lots of entrepreneurs and people who, what about this? What about that? And they never execute on anything.
Yeah.
They don't stick to anything. They don't have any vision. And I think that you're tackling important problem that people don't think is important. I think just in general, we live in a very weird time where, as much as we sort of talk about health, sometimes it's not a very serious conversation most of the time, right? And it very quickly just goes to, oh, what kind of pills can you give people, or
Yeah.
what kind of it's all about just shortcuts, right? Especially in the USA, right? Even more so in the USA, it's people want, just take this supplement or take this
Yeah.
drug or do this thing. And what I like about what you're doing is it's kind of back to the basics on a very literal sense. It's literally, let's go to the foundation. Let's, what are you doing all day? You're standing, you're walking. Some people are not doing enough of that, unfortunately, but people, everybody at least is, standing up and walking around a little bit. So let's look at the shoes. Let's go back to square one, and let's look at what we're even sticking on our feet every single day. And I think it's good to challenge that status quo and to get people thinking about it. Because I can say, even when you reached out to me when we were discussing, doing this podcast, it made me think, okay, what about shoes? Like, I've got a lot of shoes, right? Like yourself, I've got a lot of shoes. And it's like, actually, okay, I've never really thought about this much. I've spent a lot of time thinking of, what's the right angle to hit my biceps, or what's the perfect way to deadlift or bench press or this or that, but haven't spent that much time thinking, okay, well, what should actually be on my feet, if anything, while I'm doing all this. So I like the fact that it's challenged me, and that's part of why I wanted to have the conversation, because it was like, okay, what are we missing about feet? What are we missing about shoes? And what can we do to optimize our health?
Yeah, and I think one of the cool things about it is that we're so driven by culture and how it's always been, right? And I think I got this very nice email from this lady called Eva the other week, and she said, when I first looked at the shoes, I laughed. And I said, there's no way this is going to work. But then I gave it 2 weeks. And now my my vision has shifted. And now I think all my other shoes look weird. And now I think this is what is the most comfortable, and I can't walk in anything else. But also, and I find that with myself a lot too. Like, for example, when we got our new sneaker, the samples, the latest samples, just 5 days ago or something, I'm looking at them and it's like, okay, first reaction is a little weird, but then I start walking in them and I see how they respect the anatomy of the foot. And then I start looking at my other shoes that are collecting dust in my hallway, and I think that is weird. Why do shoes look like that? That the foot doesn't look like that. And I think that's quite powerful. And I've from our part, I mean our colleagues that we are conducting a large study with at My Foot Function, they see the same thing too, and have seen the same thing over the past 10 years. And I think that's something that I like that you say that it challenged you, right? Because I'd like it to challenge people, and it's not for everyone. Everyone is not going to wear a wide shoe, but even just walking barefoot more for
Mhm.
all the Americans that are tuning into this is very powerful.
Well, you say, not everyone's going to wear it, but who knows, man? Who knows? You could be starting a revolution. I think when they released the first iPhone, about 17 years ago, right? I don't think they thought. I'm sure most people thought it wasn't for most people, right? Why do I want a phone with no buttons, right? Why would I
It's
want a
like
phone with no buttons? Like, they completely destroyed what people were used to. And now every single manufacturer, regardless of the country, now if you see someone with a phone with buttons, you're like, man, why? What are these buttons for, right? Why isn't it just a screen?
yeah.
So who knows? Maybe even some of these, I wouldn't be surprised if if you can get this to enough people, if it sets off a rethinking around other companies. Because even I myself am thinking it's strange that most of the big shoe brands, they don't even have this as an option.
They've tried. They've
Right?
tried, but it didn't
Okay.
sell well for them. Uh,
Interesting.
and there's too much money, I would say, in just doing business as usual. There are people who have exited the big companies that have said that they know that this is a problem, but that there's too much money involved. And I think that's the big challenge that we have. There's a lot of money on the other side, and then we are coming here as we had two brothers who started the company, but we were gaining traction, and I think that's powerful. And the word of mouth part of it is and can be very powerful, which is why it's amazing to talk about it in depth like this on a podcast, because you never know, maybe a couple thousand people hear this and then they talk about it with their friends, and then they're like all start to think about it, and then you never know the ripple effect.
Oh,
But
dude. Yeah.
yeah, but as I
I'll
said,
tell you straight out, man. Do not underestimate. Do not underestimate your power as an individual.
yeah,
This is something. I mean, I've known it for a long time, but more now than ever. One person or a couple of people, if you have a good idea and you put it out there to the world, and you've got a good product or service or whatever it is, you will be astonished by just how far it can reach, especially in this day and age, because the interconnectivity is just insane, right? I mean, obviously you're on my radar now, and then by us doing this podcast, boom, that puts it on many thousands more people's
yeah.
radars, and then yeah, it just ripples outwards, man. So I'm excited about it, man. I think it's cool. It's not that often that I hear about a new company or a new product, and I myself am like, actually, that's genuinely innovative, and that's intriguing, and that's actually fixing a problem. It's typically more just copying what already exists and sort of sticking a different label on it. So I do like the fact that you've really put a lot of thought and time into this and are doing something different, man. So I wish you all the best with it, man. Where can people find and follow you online, Melker?
Yeah, I mean, I think just searching for Wide Footwear, WYDE, and then footwear is the best place to start. Instagram, Twitter, website. It's easy to. There's more information there too that you can read more about, like why our shoe is good and other shoes maybe have less favorable characteristics. But I think, yeah, in general, I mean, just following us and seeing what we're coming up with later this year. And I wanted to say also that there's this. I mean, you had Elon on your podcast a couple months ago, right?
Yep.
There's one quote from him that I read. This is many years ago, maybe 10 years ago, that he said that we cannot just make with Tesla. We cannot just make the best electric vehicle, because that's boring and people are not going to like that. But we have to try to make the best vehicle in general. And I think that quote is, I think about that every day because it's like so powerful. And I think the same way about about the shoes, right? We cannot just try to make the best functional shoe. That's really boring. Like, we have to try to make the best shoe. And that's something that I hope, it's like aim for the stars, land on the treetops, right? But I think there's something that we are going to try to do, and I hope people will see that going forward.
That's awesome. Melker, thanks for coming on the show, man. Really appreciate it. Love what you're
Thanks.
doing. Keep it up.
Thank you, Zuby.